Thank you so much for joining in for today's workshop on creating a private podcast with AccessAlly. I am so excited to have you joining in. And during this workshop, I will show you the steps of creating a private podcast with AccessAlly from start to finish. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Our workshop agenda for today is our scenario, what creating a members-only podcast looks like with AccessAlly. We'll cover delivery models using a monthly subscription model for access to the podcast. We'll build the podcast. You'll have a membership program offering inside AccessAlly. I'll share plugin recommendations and graphic design tools for creating the branding elements you'll need for your podcast. And then finally, we'll do Q&A. So our scenario today comes from several customers using AccessAlly and people that have also potentially been thinking about using AccessAlly that come to us wanting to create a members-only podcast as a monthly recurring subscription model for their business. They want to deliver this in the simplest way possible to test the waters for creating this first podcast experience. Our delivery model for the podcast will be a recurring monthly membership with the membership program offering template. And there are 3 parts behind the scenes to this delivery model. The first part is going to be the single page offering that will display your podcast episodes. Each new episode will appear on that page as they are added in. So let's see an example of this page. So here is my actual podcast that we'll be building today, and each episode appears on the base or welcome page of my offering. Next, you'll need a WordPress sales page. The sales page allows you to easily promote your podcast. You can link to your sales page from social media, your latest blog posts, and you can even sell this from inside your AccessAlly site using your AccessAlly dashboard. So sales pages themselves are not created inside AccessAlly. They're built using your favorite WordPress theme and page builder, but the icon linking is a part of AccessAlly. So when you have your podcast presented on the dashboard page of your AccessAlly site, the icon that is for no access can redirect right to the sales page for your private podcast. And then finally, we'll cover the order form. You'll link your sales page buttons to your order form. The order forms themselves are built in AccessAlly, and this way new members will get access the moment they purchase your private podcast. So they can binge all the episodes, or you could choose to drip those episodes out. It's totally up to you. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can build our private podcast using AccessAlly. So I'm going to share my plugin recommendations with you today. There are many options for creating private podcasts inside WordPress. This was just a tool that I found that I absolutely fell in love with when I was creating this workshop. So the tool that I want to share with everyone today is called Castos. It is the Seriously Simple podcast player. And what I liked about this was you have an option to get started for free with a free trial, test the waters, and see how you like creating your own private podcast. You can visit their website to find out more. They have a 14-day free trial, so you can definitely sign up and take advantage of that. I used a Canva Pro account today, and I created 2 different types of images for our workshop today. I created the image for my actual podcast, and the plugin for podcasting that we're using in this workshop shows you the dimensions and size to create this image at. And I also used the Canva Pro account to create the episode thumbnail pictures as well. Let's take a look at the front end view of the private podcast. You'll see it is just that single page. Each podcast has an episode title. There is a thumbnail image, and then there's the player itself where the podcast episode would play. I'm going to turn it off so you can see how it looks when it's playing. The progress bar will move as they're listening to the episode. And then, of course, you have a place where you can write in any details about this particular podcast episode. All right, so let's take a tour of how this is built behind the scenes. I'm going to go into the AccessAlly dashboard. I'll go to AccessAlly and Offerings. Once I'm here inside Offerings, what I did was I was at the top of the site. I clicked Plus Create, and I chose the Membership Program template. The Membership Program template allows you to create a single-page membership offering for your podcast. So let's look through what's here inside this offering, and we will even together today add a new episode of the podcast in. So here under the offering, I have a single page. This is what is called the base or welcome page in AccessAlly. Within this page, I also have a form to use for paid access to the podcast, which allows me to have an order form for the podcast. You could also create a free private podcast if you want by clicking plus add and choosing the free opt-in option, which would allow someone to have access to your private podcast for free. If you have selected the paid access form option, when you view the actual form for the membership, you will see the price point that you have created your membership to be priced at. And under automation, you will have your order started tag for abandoned carts if you would like to create an abandoned cart sequence in your CRM. You will also see that it's going to release your podcast the moment someone makes their purchase, and they will receive the purchase success tag. The additional order form setup for this membership is going to be shown under the order form settings. I have one-click order form enabled. And then also under payment success, this is where you could customize your message that is displayed after the person purchases access to your podcast. And you can change the wording here. And once they make their purchase, they will be able to click and go right to that welcome page for your podcast. So that is our order form setup for today. And remember, everything you need will be contained right here inside your offering. You'll also have your settings section. This is where you can redirect to your order form that you are using for your podcast, or you can put in a sales page redirect by clicking enter the redirect URL here. So when you do this, this will allow the icon when they have access to be green or to be your chosen color palette. If they do not have access, it will allow them to be redirected to a page of your choice. So if you want to create a beautifully branded sales page, you can enter the URL for that sales page. Or if you're going to send them directly to your order form, you can do like I did today and just put the link to your order form page. All right, so now let's talk about the branding images for your podcast. So these are just the ones that AccessAlly uses for the podcast itself. If you want to have beautifully branded cover designs for your podcast, you can click and then you can upload or choose an existing image for your site. So for example, if you have a podcast image that you want to use as the icon for getting into the podcast, you could go ahead and add that to your site. So you can always update or change the look of your icons, and you can add one for when they have access or the program is available, when they do not have access, or when they have completed the program, if you do any kind of progress tracking to let them know they've completed watching an episode, for example. All right. And everything else is just the default here. The permissions tags will be used if you decide to deliver any podcast-related emails via your CRM system. So the CRM system could be used, for example, if you wanted to send a welcome email the moment someone becomes a paying customer of your podcast. You could use the purchase success tag, and in your CRM system, you could create an email automation that goes along with your podcast. For today's workshop, we will be using AccessAlly emails, which are built in, and use the built-in release that is on your order form. So if you're using AccessAlly emails, the release itself will make sure that they get an email. All right, let's go ahead and pop into the content section of our podcast, and let's look at the page setup. So this is how this WordPress page is set up to have our private podcast. So all I have done here is I have added the block used by our Seriously Simple podcast player. And this part I thought was so cool. So here on the page, you're just adding in your block and you're using your WordPress theme. So for me, I'm using the AccessAlly theme and Gutenberg. I just click plus add block, and I am using the podcast list block. The podcast list block will display all the episodes of your podcast. So with this option, you can use this one page to display all of your podcast episodes. You can choose Show Podcast Player on the right-hand side, and the player will appear. And you can also choose Show Podcast Excerpt if you would like to show a written text description excerpt that goes along with your podcast episode. You could change the orientation and show it below the excerpt if you want the player to appear below the text or the content written for that episode, or you could turn that option off and it will appear above your text. So all I did was I made my podcast and then I just added the player shortcode here. So now let's talk about how did I add the podcast, right? So that's the important part. Like, how did we get the podcast going? So under the dashboard inside your WordPress site, when you are using the Seriously Simple podcast player, you will have a podcasting tab. So under the podcasting tab, if you click on settings, I'm going to show you the exact settings that I used today to create, or that I used when I was creating this workshop. So under podcast post types, I selected posts and I also selected protected content. That way I can decide how I upload my audio files for the podcast. I could put them as a post or I could put them as a piece of protected content in AccessAlly. Either way, posts would definitely be the quickest and the easiest option. But I know some of our users love the protected content feature for adding and protecting content as well. So that's why I checked both here today. And then under the player settings, I left media player locations to full content, excerpt, embed, excerpt. I chose above content for where the player is located, but you could also choose below content if you want to have more descriptions. Under media player visibility, I set this to only logged in users. And I turned off displaying the subscribe URLs because that is the actual live link to the podcast feed. So this way the feed itself was not turned on. But when using a private podcast, if you want your customers to be able to grab the feed so they can subscribe to it in their favorite mobile app, then you can definitely turn this option on. I set media player to HTML5 and I kept it to light mode. And then I turned off the subscription button because they're already subscribed when they get here to my membership plan. And then I turned off the display to share to use the share button. I just turned that off. And then under enable player colors, I wanted to customize some of the options on the player so it better matched my branding for this demo site. And then under the next group of settings, under feed details. So feed details is where you type in the name of the podcast that you want to create, and you can share what category your podcast is going to be in and subcategory if you like. And then you can add a description for your podcast, and you can use Canva Pro to create a podcast image for your podcast. So it'll give you sizing and all the information and details right there on the screen. So that is what I did in order to have the feed created. Then under security, these were my settings. I went ahead and password protected the podcast feed, and I chose my username for the podcast feed and my password. That is so that if someone visits the page for your RSS feed, but they are not part of your podcast, it will password protect it and prevent it from being viewed. So my settings under publishing, I just left everything at the default. And under hosting, I left everything at the default. I didn't import anything. And extensions are all paid additional upgrade options. So I didn't make any choices there just yet. The next thing I did was I saved all of this information, and then I went to the options tab and I turned all the distribution options off. This is just because I didn't want my pretend podcast to become a real podcast, but you could definitely have a public podcast if you like using this method. So if you wanted to go ahead and publish each new edition to your choice of places, you could send it to Amazon, you could send it to Pandora, on wherever you like. So you could go ahead and check any options that would apply if you want to send this anywhere else. So we'll go ahead and save our options here. Adding in new episodes was very easy for the podcast. So right now I'm going to show you how you add the next episode in. So I'm going to go to all episodes and I'm going to click add new episode, and I'm going to call this episode 3. And of course, you can add some placeholder text if you like to your episode. So any description or text you add will go here. Perfect. Then down here across the bottom under the episode file, you can go ahead and upload your audio file for your podcast. And you can even upload a placeholder image for that episode. And the episode images, remember, those are just your favorite graphics program. I used Canva to create mine today. And I think this may be my episode 3 image. Perfect, it is. So you can go ahead and add in your image picture, and you can add in your alt text. And then you just hit select, and it will use that image for this podcast episode. You can put the duration, the file size, and the date you recorded it is if you would like. You also have some options to block this from appearing in iTunes and Google Play. And then if we scroll down to the bottom, here's where you could also put your episode image if you wanted that beautifully branded icon to reflect that episode. And this part is important. So here under the visitors must log in to view this page, you're going to use your podcast-based tag. This is created from your podcast offering. This is the tag that allows access to all the episodes on that base or welcome page. So if you do not want the episodes themselves to appear on the base page all at one time, and you would prefer to have them be, let's say, on a single page, then you might have module pages attached to those episodes. So module 1, 2, 3, 4 to hold episode 1, 2, 3, or 4. You can definitely do that if you like to go along with that episode. So here under add new episode, you're just going to add the tag that releases the content for your page that you have placed your podcast episode on. So me, I'm putting them all on the base page, but if you did put them on episode 1, episode 2, episode 3 pages, you could use that tag here as well. And then I'm going to also add in our instant access tag, just in case you ever want to be able to drip the content. So if you had episode 1 has access, episode 2 has access, episode 3 has access, you would also be able to have an option to unlock all of it if you decided to drip it without someone waiting for it. So that's just an extra option in case you do decide to drip your podcast episodes. If you choose individual module tags for each episode, you might also like a quick option to gift the podcast as a bonus to someone and unlock all of it at one time. Then right here, we're going to add the revoke tag for our podcast. This is what AccessAlly uses if someone is no longer paying for your podcast, or if they choose to request a refund for your podcast. This way you can remove their access to the podcast episodes. All right, we will scroll down, and then the next thing that we will want to set here is when a visitor meets these conditions, they will be redirected. So right here, we're going to add when they're not logged in, you would either redirect them to your sales page to become a paying member of your podcast, or you could send them to your order form. So I'm going to send them directly to the order form for my monthly subscription at $7 a month for this podcast. So now that we have all of these settings set up, we are going to go ahead and publish this episode. And we will view our episode. It's going to list it on its own post style page. So now what we can do is we can come right up to our podcast. We'll go back to our offering. We're going to go into our podcast, and episode 3 will appear right across the top as each new episode automatically gets added in when you're using the player from Castos for this plugin. Okay, so I think I covered everything I wanted to cover about setting up and creating the private podcast. Thank you so much for watching this workshop. If you'd like to see how to build an AccessAlly site from start to finish, we offer a free training called AccessAlly 101. You can sign up and grab this training by going to accessally.com/f/training.